Well, hey everyone, it's Lance from Christianity Minute. All the month of February here on Christianity Minute, we're taking time to look at the concept of marriage, divorce, and remarriage. It's a controversial topic to say the least. It's one that's caused an enormous amount of division among the churches that belong to God. And it's torn people away from Christ because of their own feelings, family, and their own personal mindset. It pulls at people's heartstrings so strongly that even the most grounded and faithful Christian can be in danger of straying from the way that Christ has prescribed. Well, previous episodes have already discussed the joy of marriage and when a divorce, although never the best option, may sometimes be necessary and justified. Today, we examine a different topic. So many people divorce for reasons that are not authorized by God that I would call it an epidemic. Marriage has become something that is as casually exited as casually as entered into. I've even heard of marriage vows that say that couples will be together not as long as they both shall live, but as long as they both shall love. People treat marriage the same as they do a dating relationship, one that can be called off if necessary if the going gets really tough. As I mentioned last week, a divorce, lawful or not, really can only occur for one reason and one reason only: sin. Sometimes it's the sin of one member of the union, sometimes both, but either way, sin is the only way to a divorce. There's always a guilty party. The only legitimate reason for divorce is when one party is cheating. Adultery, as we talked about last week, is really the only reason for a divorce that we can bank on. But reconciliation is best. Partially because there's usually an underlying reason. Sometimes one party doesn't feel like their needs are being met. Sometimes one party is isolating the other for whatever reason. Either way, something is broken down that can be repaired before the final divorce, in most cases. But it really does take work and maturity. A lack of both is usually the final reasons for the rest of the items that I'll talk about today. Let's talk about one of the biggest reasons for a divorce, and that one party just isn't happy in the marriage relationship anymore. Marriage should be joyous, but there will always be times when differences occur. This can be from children, money, lack of communication, idiosyncrasies that drive the other crazy, whatever. Something has occurred that causes the other to fall out of love. I once heard a preacher's response to this, saying, "I just don't love her anymore." And he said, "Tough. You're a grown man, as someone who has accepted Christ and has accepted her as your wife. You have a responsibility to her, to love, to cherish, to protect her, as you have elected to be her helpmeet, just as she chose you as the same. You made a promise to God and to her to love her until your dying breath. You need to find that love again." His response was harsh. But he knew this man, and he knew exactly what he needed to hear. I share that because I can't be privy to every situation, but I can tell you this was really good advice. Let's look at Ephesians chapter 5, verses 25 through 33. It says, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he may sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she may be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband." Well, the cross-reference on your screen right above me harkens back to Genesis chapter 2, verses 23 to 24, where it says, "Then the man said, 'This at last is bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of the man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh.'" You know, the idea of one flesh is dominant in Genesis. God joins us together. Think of it this way. When I was a teenager, I'd have pimples appear on my skin. I wouldn't just remove the skin from my body and discard it despite my skin offending me, making me unhappy, causing me more grief than I wanted to bear as a teenager. Let's face it, I was trying to impress girls. To remove my skin would be an invitation to death. God describes a husband and wife as one flesh, and a husband should love his wife as if she were a part of his own body, because in God's eyes, she is. God made woman from a rib of man, and they were made one flesh. The importance of this relationship is even described with so much emphasis in Ephesians that it's used to describe Christ's relationship with the church, that he loved the church more than anything, even giving up his own life. You think Jesus was happy about going to the cross? We even see him praying in the garden that if it were possible to let the cup pass from him. How many husbands out there today would actually die for their beloved wife, or vice versa? How many couples would put everything on the line to stick together? Happiness is not the goal of the Almighty God. I made a video about, does God want us to be happy, a while back. Check that video out for more on this topic. But happiness is secondary to holiness. And in holiness, we can find true happiness. Sure, we can find a kind of happiness by leaving the one that we had committed ourselves to when things don't seem to be working out. But that happiness is short-lived. It ends when we go face to face in the judgment. We don't want to be going to God for judgment and hear him say that we had our reward, hearkening back to Matthew chapter 6. That being said, several will say that their husband or wife have fallen away, or they chose to be sinful, that they fall upon the idea of being unequally yoked with an unbeliever from 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 12 through 16. It says, "To the rest I say, not I, but the Lord, that if any brother has a wife who is an unbeliever, and she consents to live with him, he should not divorce her. If any woman has a husband who is an unbeliever, and he consents to live with her, she should not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband is made holy because of his wife, and the unbelieving wife is made holy because of her husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. But if the unbelieving partner separates, let it be so. In such cases, the brother or sister is not enslaved. God has called you to peace. For how will you know, wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife?" Many will ask if this is a contradiction to Jesus' statement back in Matthew chapter 19, verses 6 through 9. And we need to point out that Jesus is speaking to the lost sheep of Israel, the Jews. But in the time of Paul, when writing 1 Corinthians, he had a brand new problem: different religions. When someone was converted, their partner may have left them, so an exception was made in this situation. The idea of being unequally yoked with an unbeliever from 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14 can be applied in this situation. It cannot be applied when someone who has heard the word and proclaims to be a Christian suddenly falls away. They made the same promise to the same God and therefore are bound by the same law of God. And this exception does not apply. Lastly, what about if one partner is abusive? Abusive relationships are trouble, to say the least. And certainly if the offending party is not going to change, it may be best for the victim to leave. Sin has occurred in this case, that the aggressor has not loved his or her spouse as themselves, as commanded. That being said, a divorce, to be legitimate in God's eyes, has to be done in two different places, two different ways, both legally and spiritually. God does not give provision to end a relationship on abusive grounds. I have opinions as to why, but that could be a separate video all on its own. If one spouse leaves another on abusive grounds, they may do so with the caveat that the marriage is still active in the eyes of God. Which leads us to the end of this week's video, and a great lead-in to next week's topic, remarriage. When, after the end of a marriage, can we still get remarried and not sin? Can we live in a state of perpetual sin? What if a marriage is not legitimate? What do we do then? These are tough topics that need to be addressed, and we'll do so next time because that's been your Christianity Minute for this week. I always work very hard to make sure that all things said are scripturally accurate and clearly state any opinions that I may have. This series is under the oversight of an eldership, but is not funded or sanctioned by any individual church or churches. If you would like to assist my efforts to bring you these videos, feel free to support me directly on Patreon at patreon.com/Christianity_minute. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments section below. A warning, next week will be the toughest of all. It's one that may stir up feelings of hate or sadness because of someone you love or a situation that you yourself may be in. Be courageous in this study. A topic like this may break hearts because of the realization of sin in one's life. But heaven is our goal, not earthly gratification. Remember, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more from Christianity Minute, hit that subscribe button and the bell icon for notifications. I post a new video every Sunday at 6 p.m. and a short devotional video every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 5 a.m. Now, I really look forward to finishing this topic with you next week, right here on Christianity Minute.